Back in the 60s, the Netherlands had one of the best music scenes anywhere in the world, and we recently explored 10 incredible tracks from that period. But the Dutch scene was so full of great music that 10 tracks simply weren't enough. So here are 10 more songs from the Netherbeat wave of the 60s. Let's begin. Cuby and the Blizzards are considered one of the most prominent bands associated with the Netherbeat wave of the 60s. And just like other popular Dutch groups from that period, such as Q65 and The Outsiders, their early recordings were heavily influenced by the wild and anarchic rhythm and blues sound of British bands like the Pretty Things. Cuby and the Blizzards were formed in the village of Krollo in 1964. And this track called Your Body Not Your Soul, which was released as a B-side in 1966, is a great example of their early sound. The song combined the energy of rhythm and blues with a raw intensity that mirrored the proto-punk sound of many other Netherbeat tracks from the mid-60s. The band's lineup changed regularly, and between 1967 and 1969, the group even featured Herman Brood on keyboards, who would later enjoy a successful solo career and became a true icon of Dutch rock and roll. Perhaps more than any other Netherbeat group, Cuby and the Blizzards built their reputation on a deep appreciation for the blues, and they would soon become one of Europe's most respected blues groups. But Your Body Not Your Soul remains a fascinating snapshot of their early sound. Years later, the song reached a new audience through its inclusion on the acclaimed second volume of the Nuggets box set, bringing it to the attention of 60s music enthusiasts around the world and cementing its status as one of the essential recordings of Netherbeat. By the end of the 60s, some Dutch bands had pushed the sound of Netherbeat to such extremes that they were anticipating entire genres that would only emerge years later. And few records illustrate this phenomenon better than Train of Doomsday by the Sound of Imker. In an interview from 2002, Dead Kennedys frontman Jello Biafra described Train of Doomsday as the only true 60s hardcore record he knew, even suggesting it could be considered the first hardcore recording of all time.
It's a train! It's a train! It's a train! It's a train!
The band existed only briefly and released just one single in 1969. But despite its obscurity, Train of Doomsday has since become one of the most legendary records to emerge from the Dutch underground. The song was built around savage, distorted guitars and an almost unhinged level of intensity, and it sounds unlike almost anything else recorded in Europe at the time. Even though the single sold only in small numbers and the band disappeared soon afterwards, Train of Doomsday has since become one of the most sought-after Dutch records of the 60s, prompting Milk Cow Records to reissue the single in 2016. The label described the track as the Stooges covering a Motorhead tune on blown-up amps, a fitting description of one of the most ferocious recordings to emerge from the Netherlands in the 60s.
That's a train! That's a train!
Freeze the ground! Freeze the ground! Freeze the ground! Freeze the ground!
Damascus were originally formed in Amsterdam in the early 60s under the name ZZ and Damascus, a group whose stage act was characterized by the Zorro masks worn by its members. The band enjoyed considerable success in the Netherlands with hits such as Dracula, released in 1964. In 1965, they even recorded a single with Chubby Checker. But after lead singer Bob Boober left the band, they shortened their name to simply Damascus. The track featured in this video, a song called Three's a Crowd, was released as a single in March 1966, and it's arguably the band's greatest recording. At the time, British bands like The Who often described their more feedback-laden and experimental recordings as pop art, and Damascus adopted a similar approach, even including the term in parentheses in the song's title. And of course, one of the highlights of the song is the wild feedback-laced guitar that runs throughout the track. And then there are the explosive and unhinged guitar bursts that almost sound like gunshots. It's by far one of the most aggressive mod-inspired tunes of 1966. The single was accompanied by a cool mod-style picture sleeve, and it attracted a fair amount of attention when it was first released. But the track gained cult status years later through its inclusion on several compilations of forgotten 60s singles, introducing the song to a new generation of 60s music aficionados.
Won't you stay with me?
Johnny Kendall and the Heralds were among the earliest groups to emerge from the beat scene in Amsterdam, and they became one of the most consistent acts of the Netherbeat period, releasing a dozen singles between 1964 and 1967. This track called Girl was released in early 1966, and it's without a doubt one of the band's finest recordings.
Forget the words I say. Please come back and stay.
The track was built around a fantastic melody and a kink-style guitar riff, and it perfectly captured the raw excitement of the Dutch scene. Girl was never a major international hit, but it can proudly stand alongside many of the best modern beat singles of the era. And just like other tracks featured on this video, the song achieved cult status through its inclusion on several Netherbeat and garage rock compilations. Before achieving international fame with Focus, guitarist Jan Akkerman played in several groups, and Brainbox was the last band he joined before leaving to form Focus. Their debut single, a song called Down Man, was released in 1969 and became one of the band's first major successes. The group's sound combined blues, psychedelia, and the emerging progressive style that would soon define the next phase of Dutch rock. And the song provided the perfect showcase for Akkerman's extraordinary guitar playing, effortlessly blending blues phrasing with flashes of the virtuosity that would soon make him one of Europe's most acclaimed guitarists. Shortly after the release of Brainbox's debut album, Akkerman left the band to form Focus, later joined by Brainbox drummer Pierre van der Linden and bassist Cyril Havermans, completing the classic early Focus lineup. But Down Man remains one of the defining records of Brainbox's career, a record that reflects the moment when Netherbeat was evolving into the more ambitious, progressive sound that would dominate the scene later in the 70s.
The morning sun already hurts my feelings as I awake. Slow motion mind.
Another song from the late 60s that reflected the psychedelic direction the Dutch scene had taken by that time is Slow Motion Mind, released as a single by The Tower in late 1968. The Tower was a short-lived Dutch group formed in 1968 by musicians who had already made their names in the Netherbeat scene. The band featured guitarist Alco Gelling of Cuby and the Blizzards, alongside singer-songwriter Bode Vijn de Kroot, whose distinctive vocals gave the group a very different character from most Dutch bands of the period.
Black is the coffee that will turn my stomach and the paper reads of yesteryear.
Slow Motion Mind reached number 18 on the Radio Veronica charts, and it's one of the best slices of psychedelia to come out of the Netherlands in the 60s, showcasing the more experimental direction Dutch rock was taking by the end of the decade.
See me waiting, girl, please come my way. Now I'm yearning for you, it's not easy to stay.
The Bintangs were formed in the town of Bijverwijk in 1961, and they were originally an Indo-rock group, a genre developed by the Indo community in the Netherlands that fused Indonesian and Western music. During their early years, the group was heavily influenced by pioneering Indo-rock acts such as the Tielman Brothers. But by 1965, the success of British bands like the Rolling Stones inspired the Bintangs to embrace a much stronger rhythm and blues sound. and their uncompromising approach soon earned them a reputation as one of the hardest-hitting bands in the Netherlands, as evidenced by their cover of You Can't Judge a Book by Its Cover, released as a single in October 1965. The track featured in this video was released as a B-side in 1967, and it showed the band moving towards a more adventurous way out approach. One of the highlights of the song is the truly unusual and eccentric bursts of fuzz guitar that keep appearing throughout the track. The performance has a loose, almost reckless quality that gives the record an authenticity that makes it stand out, and those wonderfully weird guitar touches never let up from beginning to end. The Bintangs would later become better known for blues rock records such as Riding on the L&N and Traveling in the USA, but See Me Waitin' remains one of the hidden gems of their catalogue and one of the most inventive recordings of their career.
Yes, it comes in the right night time. Take her home, take her home. Take a chance, you won't never mind. Take her home, take her home.
The Roadies were formed in the town of Oude Pekela in the mid-60s, and they quickly established themselves as one of the most talented bands of the Netherbeat era. Take Her Home was released as a single in 1967, and it became the band's breakthrough hit, reaching number 2 in the Dutch charts and turning the Roadies into one of the country's leading groups. The track was driven by an infectious upbeat melody and an irresistible mod-inspired rhythm, and it's a great example of the youthful energy that made Netherbeat such an exciting movement.
Well, it's the moment you were waiting for all night long. Take her home. Can't you see that she is wanting more? Take her home. Take her
The group later moved towards a more psychedelic and experimental sound on singles such as Just Fancy and on their album Earnest Vocation, but Take Her Home remains one of their defining recordings.
Such a good man, so mean and mad.
Les Baroques were formed in Barn in 1965, although the musicians had been playing together under different names since the late 50s. While many Netherbeat bands from the mid-60s drew primarily on rhythm and blues, Les Baroques developed a far more eccentric sound, combining beat music with folk, Baroque pop and unusual instrumentation such as bassoon, harpsichord and even balalaika. Such a Cad was released as a single in December 1965, and it became the band's biggest hit, reaching the Dutch top 10 and establishing them as one of the leading groups of the Netherbeat period.
Every girl I've kissed, I've been checking off on my list.
The track was built around a driving beat and a memorable vocal performance by Gary O'Shannon, and the song's distinctive bassoon passages made the song sound unlike almost anything else being recorded in the Netherlands at the time.
Baby, can't you see? It's because you don't love me.
This unusual combination gives the record a personality all of its own, making it one of the most original Dutch singles of the mid-60s. The group continued recording after singer Gary O'Shannon left for military service later that year, but many fans consider the group's early singles to be their finest work. And Such a Cad has since become one of the defining classics of Netherbeat.
The masters taking people to places to places where to see.
Sharks and Me were formed in Amsterdam in 1965, originally under the name The Frogs. The group only released 2 singles, and their commercial success was limited, but they left behind one of the hidden gems of the Dutch psychedelic scene.
Waiting for something to happen. Waiting for something to happen. Waiting.
Buses was released as the B-side of the band's debut single in 1967, and it perfectly captured the moment when Netherbeat was beginning to embrace the colourful sounds of psychedelia. The song balanced catchy pop melodies with the more adventurous spirit that was emerging in British music at the time, with clear noticeable influences from bands like The Move.
The man in the street seems to up on his feet, and his look is the time of the clock on the street. Well,
Even though Sharks and Me released only 2 singles before disappearing, Buses achieved cult status years later through its inclusion on the influential Rubble compilation series, introducing the song to a new generation of garage rock and psychedelic music enthusiasts. I know I said this video would feature only 10 tracks, but I couldn't resist including one more. So here's a bonus track for those of you who made it to the end of the video. Tame Me Tiger was the debut single by Bonnie St. Clair, released in 1967. The song was clearly inspired by Wild Thing by the Troggs, borrowing its swaggering rhythm and stripped-down sound, but at the same time giving the formula a fresh twist with Bonnie's confident vocal performance. Bonnie St. Clair was backed by a group called The Jets, who give the song punch and excitement, and Bonnie delivers the song with a swaggering, sensual performance that perfectly complements the band's raw energy. Bonnie St. Clair would later enjoy far greater commercial success in the 70s with hits such as I Won't Stand Between Them and her work with Unit Gloria. But Tame Me Tiger remains one of the standout female-fronted recordings of the Netherbeat era. I hope you enjoyed this second journey through the Dutch music scene of the 60s. If you missed the first part of the video, click here, and I'll also leave a link to it in the video description. See you next time.